the ancient faith for the modern world. This is Ancient Faith Radio.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
This is Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan Armitage, a live interactive call-in program where your questions about the Orthodox faith are addressed. Father Evan is the priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado. Call in your question at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here now is Father Evan.
Good evening, and welcome to Orthodoxy Live, your live call-in show about the Orthodox faith, her teachings, and traditions. I'm your host, Father Evan, and we're streaming to you live here on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm glad you are with us. If you'd like to join tonight's broadcast and watch live while we are streaming, you can do that. I'm going to have my producer share in the notes how to do that. I'm just not much of a techie, so I don't even know where you would find us, but I think it's on the Ancient Faith Ministry YouTube channel. Is that... Thank you, Matushka. Yeah, so you can hop on over there and you can tune into the broadcast and watch us stream here live on the Ancient Faith Ministries YouTube channel. Or you can just listen as you normally do, streaming live here on Ancient Faith Radio. Of course, if you listen to this as a podcast, well, you can continue to do that as well, but you're also welcome to check out the broadcast on the YouTube channel as it gets uploaded there for later viewing as well. Couple of things to point out to you as we get underway. Today is September 10th, 2023, and it is the Sunday before the Feast of the Elevation of the Holy Cross. This is a fixed feast, meaning it is a celebration of the church that comes every year on the same day, September 14th. And some people get confused by that. There are other fixed feasts like December 25th, Christmas, or January 6th, Epiphany. But there are feasts that move around. We all know that the date of Easter changes each year, or Pascha, as we are more fond of calling it in the Orthodox faith because of its theological meaning. Nonetheless, the church often prepares us to enter into a feast, and then also helps us as we exit a feast. And there are accompanying readings that come with certain feasts. Today's reading from John chapter 3, verse 13 through 17, speaks about the lifting up of the Son of Man on the cross as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness. And for those of us who are familiar with the Bible, we know that that story that Jesus refers to is an event that occurred in the history of Israel when they were wandering in the wilderness and were being afflicted by snakes that were biting and killing the Israelites. And God's solution to that was to have Moses make a brass serpent and put it on a pole and lift it up. Sounds very unusual and strange, in terms of a solution, and lifted that up in the wilderness. And the Israelites were told if they were to look upon it, then if they were bitten, they would not be injured or sickened. This was, of course, a foreshadowing to the cross, where Christ would be lifted up upon the cross. And those who look upon the cross accept the cross of Christ and his life-giving death upon it, which was done for the salvation of the human race. Then they too would no longer undergo the sting of death, right? But would be transferred from death to life. So the church remembers that passage in anticipation of the feast, which is coming this Thursday, and we read it. We also provide a visual to this feast and to that reading. If you ever have seen a bishop's staff, you'll see a serpent, two of them, winding their way around the staff, and they are both with mouth open below the cross of Christ. It's also a symbol that made it onto the side of our ambulances. If you've ever seen that symbol on the side of an ambulance, that's recalling what occurred in the wilderness. So we're live tonight, and as we get underway, we have wide open lines, which is usually what occurs when I've not been on air. I've had some travel. I was in Greece for a wedding that took place, and we had a holiday weekend in between there as well. But I did travel to Greece to celebrate the wedding of my cousin. First time I'd been in Greece in over 22 years. What's interesting to share with all of you is that I was in the village of my grandfather on my dad's side on the island of Lefkada, small little village called Katohori, and I celebrated both the wedding and the following day a liturgy in the new church. The church there has iconography from the 1700s. Just up the hill in the village is the older church. The iconography in there is from the 1400s. And then a little bit further up the hill is the funeral chapel. And I had an opportunity to visit the grave sites of my ancestors, which was a rather powerful experience. I returned back, and here we are, as for most parishes, the start of not only the ecclesiastical year, but we are all beginning the new school year, right? And many of the programs that go on in our parishes get underway, the ministries, religious education, and such. And the same goes for the parish of St. Spiridon's. But I wanted to share one last little bit of personal information. I was just incredibly blessed by the fact that our parish, which had its first service in its new church on 2018, paid off its mortgage just 5 years later in August of this year. And so we announced that to our parish. And we thank God for the growing reality and ministry that the parish of St. Spiridon has provided to the people of Northern Colorado, and by extension to all of you. And we invite you, if you haven't yet picked up a book that really details the experience of building this parish and then the lessons learned, it's available on Ancient Faith Publishing, called Reclaiming the Great Commission. And in addition, my first book, Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, just did an interview with the very popular podcast and YouTube show Gospel Simplicity. So if you get a chance to check out that interview, I think you would enjoy it. So again, tonight we're taking your calls, wide open lines, 1-855-237-2346, or you can also get to us, 1-855-AF-radio, by sending in your question to askask@ancientfaith.com or orthodoxylive@ancientfaith.com. As we get going, a little shout out to our producer and engineer who jumped on just a second ago, Matushka Trudy, whose friend visited our parish a couple weeks ago. Matushka Trudy, I'm going to bring you on here for a second. You with me? Oh, I threw her a curveball. She's not ready to jump on.
Hi, I'm right here. I'm right here. I was just answering a call.
So your dear friend Isabel joined us a couple weeks ago.
She did. Oh my goodness.
How do you know each other?
Isabel and I go to church together here at St. Elizabeth the New Martyr. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see.
Yes, she and her family, I believe, relocated from the Chicago area to hear about, about 3 years ago.
Oh, how neat. Mm-hmm. Well, I just wanted to share that because as many of our communities are experiencing post-COVID, is a sort of boom of people coming, new families showing up all the time. And of course, we were pleased to welcome Isabel. And I hear she may be considering a move out. So we'll see. We'll see.
She is. You will hear from her. She was so excited to do a little bit of traveling, and she visited a monastery, an amazing story. Isabel is an amazing young lady seeking after, Christ and his church. Yes. Mm-hmm. So wonderful. She had such a good experience visiting
She made quite an impression on some of our families, so we hope to see you again. Well, thanks for jumping in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to get your call ready. Thanks, okay. Father Evan.
You bet. Well, before we take that first call, I want to go ahead and take a question that came in here at Ask at Ancient Faith. Hi, Father Evan. My name's Eleni, and I wonder, in a society where one often feels like a minority without a tattoo, right? You know, that's a very common thing. Now, what is the Orthodox perspective on tattoos, and how would you broach this subject with our youth? Thank you. Your podcasts are appreciated, and thanks for using your time and talents to shine God's light into the world. Well, and a little heart emoji. I appreciate that, the hand heart emoji. Eleni, let's take the first part of that question, which is really just kind of describing, it's really more of a statement. You're right. We do live in a society in which it seems more and more people are acquiring tattoos, very, if you will, even publicly. In my day growing up, that was something that was kind of, maybe the odd sailor and serviceman or such maybe would get a tattoo. Certainly never a woman. But now we see that, all sorts of people are getting tattoos, and we can feel like we're in the minority when we aren't falling into that same sort of societal, let's say, movement. Well, look, the gospel is always contrary, right? It's always an invitation to not walk or go where the world is going. And so I would really caution any of us, not just when it comes to something like a tattoo, but really anything at all that sort of is of the world and people are sort of joining in because it's sort of a fad here in Colorado. Marijuana's been legalized, and lots of people now who never would have used marijuana because it's legal now do, of all ages and professions and you name it. And, of course, the church, I've had people say, well, Father, it's legal. Can we use it? And I said, well, no, the church does not condone the use of marijuana. And similarly, we would say, no, the church's perspective on tattoos is that we should not acquire them. That is the position of the church. Now, when people do, it's not as if the church then, excises them and throws them out, but it would not be in line with the teaching of the church. Now, in terms of how you broach this topic with youth, you've got to be careful, right? What's common when we have a topic that is, let's say, very contemporary with youth is that we may hit it too hard and as a result elicit an opposing opinion when really there isn't an opposing opinion there. But, teenagers are commonly looking for a way to assert independence, right, in terms of their own emotional and mental development. And so you have to be careful there. I think the way to approach that conversation is really not to attack that idea head on, but rather talk more around the ideas related in the Christian world around beauty, around nobility, around modesty, around the good. It's much easier to help people see what the Christian perspective is by presenting a very positive perspective on the gospel and the teachings of the church. It's something in my own homilies I try to emphasize. I don't ever feel like I should be admonishing people, especially because I'm a sinner. But rather, it's more important if I can enter into the truth of my own situation. I can be humbled by my own brokenness and share from that perspective, right? And then discuss in a very open and respectful and curious and accountable way what the church may be saying around a topic, and then to enter more into a dialogue. Now, at the same time, that doesn't mean we should compromise or shy away from what the church's position is. I'm really just talking about the presentation of that material so that we don't right away get someone who's going to react against what we're saying looking for an argument. That's something when I was younger, I was more fond of doing. And as I've grown a little bit older, maybe a little wiser, I've learned a softer approach is usually helpful. Now, the other thing is that when we can introduce the youth of our communities and ourselves too, to the aspect of living a holy lifestyle, and a holy lifestyle is a beautiful life. The attraction to what is good and holy really allows us to sort of pay less attention to what's going on in the world, and our eyes become more focused on the good, and we start to taste of its fruit, right? The fruit of true spiritual struggle and the fruit of spiritual progress. And then we're less interested in the sort of maybe quick hit that society will provide through various means, right? So thanks so much for the question, Eleni. Thanks for the kind words about the show, and I appreciate the question. All right, let's go out to the phones, and we're going to take a call from Brian. Brian, are you there?
I am.
Welcome, Brian. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Louisville, Kentucky.
Louisville, Kentucky. Well, welcome to the program. I had a dear friend right after college who was from Louisville, and she would say Louisville. Is that about right?
That's pretty close. My wife has a funny little Facebook video she likes to watch where people get very emotional about the right way to say it.
Are you serious?
She finds it very entertaining.
So what, in your opinion, is the correct way to say it?
So I've only lived here for 3 years, but I say Louisville.
Louisville. And what?
And that seems to be consistent with what most people in the area sound like to me.
Yeah. I years ago, we're talking like 1986, I traveled, I think on my own, as if my memory serves me correctly, for the first time to Boston, Massachusetts. And there's a train station, South Station. I was going out to do a student interview at the University of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I got off the plane, I rode the T over to South Station, and I went up to buy my ticket to take the commuter train, and I asked for a ticket to Worcester. And the the gentleman behind the counter he didn't even react. And I said, again, I need to get a ticket to Worcester. And he said, we don't have one of those destinations. I think you would like to go to Worcester. And I looked behind the board and I said, no, it's right there, W-O-R. And he was like, Sonny, I know how to spell it, but it's pronounced Worcester. So I learned very quickly that there's a different way to pronounce things in different parts of the country, and it may have nothing to do with the way it's spelled, right? So I would pronounce it Louisville, right? Which is
right.
Incorrect.
Not dissimilar from the mysterious Worcestershire sauce.
Yeah, right, totally. Well, Brian, I know you didn't call in to discuss the odd ways that certain cities in the U.S. are pronounced, but tell me what's on your mind.
So I'm actually calling on behalf of my wife because she's too shy to ask herself.
Oh, that's okay.
She's in the other room listening because of the delay. I can't be in the same room right now.
Well, hello, wife of Brian.
Her name is Dindy. And
did you say Mindy?
We learned Dindy with a D.
Dindy. Got it. Well, hello, Dindy.
And we had learned through various sources, like Father Stephen's book, Religion of the Apostles, that the structure of the liturgy came from the early Christians' experiences in the synagogue. Mm-hmm. And she was wondering how that differs from Judaizing.
Yeah, I mean, that is a certain concern, right? We have in the writings of St. Paul, right? When people are reverting back to elements of Judaism, right? And he's got quite a bit to say if you're familiar with the New Testament, because you're asking a question, Brian, that, many listeners may be scratching their head over when you use that term, right? So we've got to unpack it a little bit for people. To be someone who was a Judaizer back in the time of the apostles was someone who had begun to enter into or accept the gospel of Jesus Christ and then reverted back to many of the, let's say, regulations, traditions, dietary laws of the Jews. And we see some famous arguments occurring, right, among the apostles even. And we know that Peter, one of the chief apostles, right, he and Paul have a confrontation over this, right? And you know what I'm talking about in Galatians 2. And
right.
And we even see Peter in Acts, I think it's 10, he's struggling to comprehend just how much of a transformation he must undergo, right, when it comes to accepting the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? That being said, people like St. Paul, who were certainly on the lookout for any hint of, let's say, regression, were also people who readily accepted certain elements of the worship and life of Israel, because their view was that the church was the new Israel, right? So to help understand what I'm talking about, let's take a very easy example, and then we can get more into kind of this liturgical question you've asked. So one of the hallmarks of worship in Israel would have been the Aaronic priesthood, Aaronic, right? The brother of Moses was the first priest of Israel, and the descendants of Aaron and that tribe of Aaron were forever to serve Israel as priests, right?
Right.
And yet in the new covenant, there is a new priesthood. St. Paul even discusses this, and the old priesthood, which was according to the flesh and the lineage of Aaron, is replaced by the new priesthood of Melchizedek, of Christ, of the priest of Salem, with no beginning and no end. And the church and the believers of Christ accept the priesthood as part of the life of the gospel and the life of the believing body of the church, right? And so there's, yes, a foreshadowing of the priesthood, and then there is this fulfillment of the priesthood in the priesthood of Christ. And that carried through. And again, there wasn't any sort of hiccup, and you don't see Paul arguing against, but rather arguing for, right, priesthood. Another example of that would be, we know that Israel had very specific dietary laws. And yet in the new covenant and in the covenant of Christ, those dietary laws are surpassed, and yet the church adopts a fast, which Christ himself speaks about, right? My disciples will fast when the bridegroom is taken away. And so there's this, again, foreshadowing and then carryover into a new reality. And similarly, we can speak of the style of liturgical worship that Israel lived with, the singing of psalms, right? The sensing of the altar, the singing of hymns, and the movements of the clergy, the priests, and the responses of the people was something, again, the early church, in the fact of the apostles and their immediate descendants, they still attended temple services. They still attended the local synagogue on the Sabbath, and then on Sunday they celebrated the Eucharistic assembly. And again, we don't find anywhere in Paul where he's arguing against that rhythm, right? So we have to delineate between where the old Israel is fulfilled in the new Israel, the church, and where those elements of worship or lifestyle or even the office of priesthood are accepted and adopted and used and utilized. And when St. Paul starts to sort of decipher and delineate, these elements, though, have been done away with in the new covenant. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I just gave a long, 10-minute description, and we need to check for redirect and questions and other ideas that maybe popped into your head as I was talking.
Okay, she's actually taking notes, so I'm going to ask her.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. Boy, I like it when people take notes. That's awesome. Yeah, there's a lot to digest in what I just said. And of course, I'm covering a lot of ground that, boy, if we had a few hours, we could sort of start to parse out and tease apart certain elements of what I just said. But, I'll give you another way to look at this while she's maybe reviewing her notes. Remember that for Israel, they were commanded by God to celebrate a specific meal at the Passover. And in the celebration of the Passover, Christ institutes a new meal, right? The Eucharistic meal, the meal of the kingdom, in which he gives of his own body and blood as the new lamb of Israel. And we know that the Passover meal was centered around the lamb that was slaughtered and then eaten by the Israelites. And so you can see even in that, the Lord takes something and he transforms and reintroduces it, and it becomes a part of the new covenant and of the new Israel. So, all right. Any questions pop up for her, Brian?
Any questions? New covenant. All right. Any? He very sheepishly is saying no, and she's telling me to stop asking.
Okay. Well, I mean, as you have time to process that, of course, feel free to kind of come back to me, in another episode. But anything from your perspective you want to speak about in that?
No, that's pretty similar to what I expected.
Yeah.
Just
okay.
a much more full answer. I was thinking more along the lines of the Judaizers being those Christians, whether Greek or Jewish Christians, who felt that the adherence to the Jewish practices were the required part, whereas adopting Jewish customs would just be a natural extension. For instance, an example I gave is the Christians and the pre-Christian Jews worship the same God, so we're going to at least adopt some of that, and he gave us certain ways he wanted to be worshipped.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfortunate that maybe in our modern appreciation, we tend to think of sort of this massive break. There was sort of Israel and temple worship, and it was just thrown out. And then, then the church got started, kind of like we picture it today in the modern world with some, hymn singing and, an impassioned sermon. And that's just not the case, right? It was more that the church was the fulfillment of, the fruit of that long history that God had with his people. And so anyway, well, Brian, great to hear from you. Thanks for calling. And I'm glad that we settled Louisville is the correct way to say it.
Well, I think more people say Louisville than Louisville, but
yeah,
a lot of people do say Louisville.
Okay. Talk to you later. God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You bet. Before we go to our next call, I just want to note that on YouTube, we've got a question from one of our listeners, I should say maybe one of our viewers, because you can view this show live on YouTube on the Ancient Faith Ministry channel. This person asks, which book would be your best suggestion for an introduction to the Orthodox Church? I get this question a lot. And it's a hard one to answer because it really depends on the person who's coming at Orthodoxy and where they're coming from. So, for example, if someone's never heard anything about God, and really doesn't know Scripture, right? The answer to that question is going to be very different than if it's somebody who's coming at this from maybe perhaps a very intense knowledge of Scripture and maybe even theological concepts and systematic theology. Then I'm going to give them a different answer. Or perhaps it's more about what they're trying to learn on how to live spiritually speaking. In other words, they sort of gotten to a point of appreciating and maybe even agreeing with a lot of what the Orthodox Church teaches, right, and preaches, but they really don't know how to live an Orthodox lifestyle, right? And so then that's a different book, right? So unfortunately, like I said, it's kind of a hard question to answer. And so what I tend to do is give a number of options for people when it comes to this question. So for some people, I'll say, read my book, Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, because it gives some introduction to the spiritual life of the church. And that's often what people need. Sometimes people are looking for something a little meatier. And so we might say, well, start reading the Philokalia, right? Because that's really jumping into the deep end. Or Beginning to Pray by Metropolitan Anthony Bloom. Or I might say, if they're struggling with comparisons, that they maybe tune into some of the work of Father Andrew Damick, Orthodoxy, Heterodoxy, or they may need something a little more cerebral. And so maybe Father Stephen DeYoung's books that can be a little more on the polemical side as he understands things. Another great book is Rock and Sand by Father Josiah Trenum. He does a great job of understanding where someone's coming from, especially from a Protestant background. Other books that I think are fabulous, A Short Trip to the Edge by Scott Cairn, Cairn. These are books that present the church and present its thinking, but in a way that I think is a little softer. They tell the journey that someone's been on, or The Mountain of Silence by Kyriakos Makridis. Another book that I'm very fond of is Patmos, A Place of Healing for the Soul. I think it's a lovely book. It's one I've recommended to a lot of people. And then perhaps if they're a little more like, I want to understand the Fathers, I think the St. Vladimir Seminary Press series, patristic series, it's topics that are easily kind of grasped, like on the Incarnation or on the Divine Images. They've taken writings of the Fathers and they've put them into little paperbacks that you can pick up and utilize. And then there's some kind of standards, just introductions to the Orthodox Church. Father Anthony Cunyeras wrote a nice one, Orthodox Way, or the Orthodox Church by Kallistos Ware, Becoming Orthodox by Father Peter Gilquist. You can see that I've got a lot of these books in my mind, because usually what I do with somebody is I ask them, where are you coming from? What are you trying to understand? And then I zero in. I give them a few selections, and then I tell them, hey, if none of these are scratching the itch that you are wanting me to scratch, just tell me and we'll switch, because I got a lot of things I can utilize. In terms of podcasts, sometimes I tell them, just listen to Orthodoxy Live. Just start at the beginning and just start moving through it. And you'll be surprised that, you'll get the understanding, the mindset of the church by listening. All right, let's go back out to the phones and take a call from Father Eugene. Father Eugene, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Father Ivan. Thank you very much. Blessed Sunday, blessed feast. Happy New Year.
Same to you, Father Eugene. For our listeners, just so you know why Father Eugene is saying that, well, most of us in the West, we celebrate the New Year on January 1st. But in the church, we follow the ecclesiastical New Year is September 1. So as you said, Father Eugene, Happy New Year to you as well. Father Eugene, where are you from?
Originally, I'm from Romania. Right now, I live in Chandler, Arizona.
Oh.
So if you need to be in a hot area, Arizona is the place.
Is it still pretty warm?
And it's we're still in three-digit temperature. So
wow.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Where in Romania were you from, Father Eugene?
I'm from the city of Iași, in northeast Romania, where the relics of Saint Paraskeva were, as it is known within the, I think the Serbians and Bulgarians, Saint Petka. And she's celebrated on October 14, and with a big celebration, with participation of the faithful from the surrounding countries and clergy and so forth. There's a major pilgrimage, I should say.
Amazing. Yeah, we're not used to that idea here in the United States, right? If we're Orthodox,
correct. Yes,
we don't know these things. Yeah, but you can go online and look up such things that take place in Orthodox countries, and you'll see tens of thousands of people going on pilgrimage. I had the opportunity to participate in one of those to the skete of Saint Anna on Mount Athos on her feast day, and there were thousands of people camped along the hillsides and along the road, and it was such an experience, right? And so, if you ever get a chance, if you're one of our listeners to experience something like that, it's life changing, isn't it, Father?
Yes, indeed. I stopped many times at the relics of Saint Paraskeva at the Cathedral Church in Iași while I was living there, and I have had actually the chance in 2004. I had a small group who wanted to visit Romania, so we stopped on that particular day at the feast, and so everybody could see the number of people, and little groups from wherever they came. They flocked around the Cathedral Church in the courtyard, and they all sang whatever religious songs that they wanted to sing. Everybody had their own community, and then residents of the city would go around and offer the pilgrims drinks, water, and hot tea. Sometimes October 14 can be a very cold, cold day
up there,
and so hot tea was distributed along with sandwiches. And this is not something that is organized by the church or organized by the city. Yeah. This is the neighbors are getting together. Okay, let's make I don't know, 5 liters of hot tea, and let's go and distribute it to the people.
To the pilgrims. Yeah, it's something. I mean, obviously, the church so highly prized the idea of pilgrimage that one was actually renamed. When one made a pilgrimage to especially places like Jerusalem, but to these sites, because the experience, it's like Abraham, right? The Lord told him to get up and go to a place that I will show you, and the pilgrimage changes us, right? So, Father Eugene, I have to tell you, I have a deacon in my parish, Deacon Eugene. Sometimes I tease him. He's American. I say, your name's Greek, Evgenios. Good beginning, right? It's a beautiful name, Father Eugene.
One of my professors in Romania called me Evgenios. Occasionally he would refer to me as Eugene, but most of the time he would say Evgenios.
It's a beautiful name. What's on your heart to share tonight? What's going on?
Father, I wanted to share with you and your audience my newest book titled Church Ministries on a Shoestring Budget. And it has, the book is divided in 5 major sections, one with general ministries that can be applied in the church, and then it goes to the youth ministry, so those are specific for youth, and then family ministries that are guided towards the ministry of the families, and elderly ministry, And then the one, digital media ministry. During the COVID era, we learned that we can actually use technology.
Yeah, of course.
So God provided some kind of harsh times for us to discover that His creation is greater than what we can see.
yeah, for sure.
So
for sure.
there are a lot of ways to meet and understand. We talk often about millennials and Generation Z and the nuns and the nominalism and so forth. So these people are not extraterrestrials. They are our children that we saw at one point, and now they are gone. So we have to use the means that we have at our fingertips and reach out to them and bring them back in church. We'll let them know at least that they are not forgotten, they are not abandoned, they are not kicked out. Some of these ministries, each ministry has. I'm going to read from one, like counseling ministries. There are many communities that do need counseling ministries. Different areas of the country deals with different issues, right? From gambling to alcohol to pornography to just whatever. And there's a need for that. Perhaps many of them do not have the possibility to go to a professional counselor, to a regular office, I should say, not a professional counselor. Or some of them are simply, I've met during my years as a hospital chaplain, I met people who did not want to use their insurance for such counseling services. Because of their jobs, because of their positions and so forth. So they would prefer to have a counselor, a spiritual counselor at the church, and do that kind of service for the community.
Father Eugene, I'm going to jump in here. It seems obviously the book is written in a sort of evangelistic style to sort of make sure that we are positioning the gospel in a way that is accessible, right? And for that, I'm thankful. It's near and dear to my own heart. Not only this program, but my own publications are directed in that way. So, if someone wants to find the book, Father Eugene, where do they go?
One source is Amazon, and the other source would be Barnes and Nobles.
Got it. Well, I love it, Father Eugene. Let's throw that title out once more for everybody. It's
sure. Church Ministries on a Shoestring Budget.
God bless. Well, Father Eugene, you'll have to call back in a few months. Let us know how the book's doing, okay?
Well, I hope so. And if anyone needs to get hold of me, my website is eugenrosu.com, and there's more information there about the book and about services related to the book that I provide.
Wonderful, Father Eugene. God bless. Pray for us, okay?
Thank you. And I will, and pray for us as well.
Good night, Father Eugene. Thanks for calling in. Well, we're gonna go back out to the phones, and I think we're gonna take a call. I think this is Father George, maybe from Detroit. Is that right?
This is George.
George, okay.
In the Detroit area. Now I am in Wheaton, Illinois, and I'm not a priest.
Okay. Yeah, on my array, as the calls come up, it shows the name, and it has George, F-R-I-L, and so I thought, is this another priest? Well, George, welcome to the program. I got a little confused there. Now, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Wheaton, Illinois.
Wheaton, Illinois. Wonderful. Well, it's nice to have you on the program. Are you originally from Michigan?
Originally from Michigan, yes.
Moved out to Wheaton. What caused the shift?
Retirement, a second marriage after losing my first wife. And my older children are in this area, so closer to my grandchildren.
Yeah. How many grandchildren do you have, George?
I have.
I put you on the spot. Sorry, 6.
Yeah, 6 and 3 step grandchildren.
Oh, how wonderful! I'm sure that that's just such a precious thing. You know, I hear that all the time. I'm in the midst of raising my 4, no grandchildren yet, but it's not that far off in this sense. You know, my children are entering into their adult lives, and so God willing, one day they'll marry and have children of their own, and I know that that's a special time, right?
Yes, God willing.
Indeed. Well, George, what's on your heart?
I have a question about the Divine Liturgy and I guess possibly local traditions, differences that you might encounter in visiting other,
of course,
other churches. Specifically, the church I was at in the Detroit area, and now the one we're attending here in Joliet, Illinois, or OCA. We occasionally visit a Greek church.
Okay,
and my question specifically is about the litanies before the cherubic hymn.
Yeah.
And it seems like when we go to the Greek churches, we transition immediately from the end of the gospel to the cherubic hymn, leaving out a series of litanies.
Yeah.
And at the OCA churches, there will be 2 or 3 or 4 different iterations of litanies. So what would cause those differences between jurisdictions or? Yeah.
Well, so as you ask that question, you know, again, for some listeners, it's going to be a question that they can't even decipher, George. And it's hopeful to sort of unpack this a little bit for everybody. So liturgy is a term that is typically applied to the service that the church has celebrated on Sunday morning, right? And we usually apply an additional word, divine liturgy, right? The divine liturgy. And the divine liturgy has as its central focus the consecration and reception of the gifts of the body and blood of Christ, right? That's its central focus. It is in continuation with what our Lord instituted in the mystical supper, right? So that's the divine liturgy. Sometimes the term liturgy is also applied to other services of the church, you know, in a more looser way. Because the word liturgy literally means the work of the people. So the idea that when the people gather and pray, this is the work of the people, right? To gather, to pray, to worship God, right? And to commune with God, right? Now, the Sunday morning service, the divine liturgy, within the Orthodox communion, and what I mean by that is, you know, sometimes people are confused by that, George. Like when you say, well, I go to an OCA church, or I go to a Greek Orthodox church, or I go to a Romanian Orthodox church. Sometimes when you're on the outside, you think, well, are all these churches different? Right? And as you and I know, no, they're all part of the worldwide communion of Orthodox churches. Yet each of them has its own distinctive set of let's say small t traditions and customs, right? Depending on where that church comes from. So if you are living in Syria, that church there has adopted customs and traditions of the local people, and it operates in a way that's very distinct than if you were to go to a church in, let's say, New Orleans, you know, down in Louisiana, right? It's going to be different. Yet, again, to sort of maybe further complicate, but hopefully not, when we're talking about liturgy celebrated on a Sunday morning outside of what has been traditionally Orthodox countries, like, you know, Greece, Romania, Russia, Serbia, Syria, Ethiopia, Lebanon, right? In places like in America, you can attend a church that's Orthodox, that's going to have a set of distinct customs and traditions that's different in the same city than a church that's down the street that's under a different set of customs and traditions. And that's where we usually get into that breakdown of saying, well, I'm part of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, or I'm part of the Orthodox Church of America Archdiocese. And each of those, if you go to an OCA church, its background is more Slavonic, right? Out of the Patriarchate of Moscow, right? So its order of services follows a more Slavonic set of traditions and customs. If you're in a Greek Orthodox parish, you're more likely to encounter what you would see in Greece, right? And the Church of Greece, right? Now, why that's important to note is because each of these, let's use a term that's not really appropriate, but it helps just understand what we're talking about. Each of these churches was part of a national church, right? So if I go to Greece, George, and I go and I celebrate the liturgy, and I go and I attend services in the city of Thessaloniki, okay? And then I go next week and I'm in Athens. And then after Athens, I go to a small little village like the one I was in, Katohori and Lefkada. You're going to find very little that's different between each of those places, right? And if I go from OCA church to OCA church here in America, you probably have seen that it's pretty much the same, right? Is that true?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. Now, where some both of the distinction of the national church and then distinction of what we even see in local parishes of the same church, national church, comes down to this. In my parish of St. Spiridon, which is part of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, okay? If you come to services, it is 99.9% in English, okay? And at the time of the Eucharist, because I have so many people who are not Orthodox, who are investigating or have become catechumens, at the time of the Eucharist, I will invite those who are not Orthodox to come forward to receive a blessing because they cannot receive the Eucharist, right? Whereas if you were to go to another Greek Orthodox parish, let's say in Detroit, Michigan, you would not see the offering of a blessing at the time of the Eucharist, nor would you hear the service in English. So that custom or tradition of that local parish would be different. But in terms of the litanies, which are a series of short petitionary prayers said during the liturgy after the reading of the gospel and before the cherubic hymn, in both my parish and in a parish in Detroit that are part of the GOA are going to be the same, but they are going to be different than what you find in an OCA church and a GOA church. And the OCA church is keeping the longer rubric, which is to include a set of petitions, usually done by the deacon, after the homily and after the reading of the gospel and before the cherubic hymn, right? And as you've noted, when I go to a GOA parish, I don't hear that litany. Now, interestingly, there is movement within the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese to restore those litanies. Now, how did they get taken out? Now, liturgical theologians will argue a lot of things here, but the basic reality is that it seems, for expediency's sake, some of those litanies were removed or omitted or even put into sort of a page in your service book that is shaded to say, in other words, these can be done, but typically they're not. And all of that did was it shortened the length of the liturgy, right? But, the church is maybe recovering itself and saying, well, that probably shouldn't be done. Now, that's a very long answer to what maybe seem like a simple question, but I wanted to give it a full sort of treatment. Georgia, you follow up there?
Yes, it's been interesting.
Okay. Does that make sense to you, what I've said?
Yeah, it totally does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Churches in different areas, like, different countries, different national churches would develop different patterns.
Practices. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would tell you that really even earlier, if you go back earlier, the basic structure of the liturgy hasn't really changed, right? And we have early writings that describe the liturgy. And basically what gets celebrated in an Orthodox church anywhere in the world is basically the same as what was celebrated, we know, in the first century. Okay? That's amazing. But there were additions that were not theological innovation, but, if you will, an opportunity for the church to more fully express what was found in the more, let's say, condensed version that you would maybe have found in the first century. So certain hymns, which more fully expressed the theology of the church, certain movements, eventually made their way in. Now, there was great variety in terms of the style of liturgies that were celebrated. And with the rise of what is known as sort of the Liturgy of Constantinople and the Queen City of the New Rome, almost all liturgies now are patterned after the capital city of Constantinople. So even in the way that an OCA parish is celebrating, it's basically structured as the liturgy was structured in Constantinople when that city became so preeminent. Okay, so you celebrate the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, right, on Sunday.
Yes.
And so does every Orthodox church throughout the world. And that liturgy has supplanted the liturgical style of other liturgies, like the liturgy of St. James. And we know that we still use the liturgy of St. Basil, let's say, or the pre-sanctified liturgy of St. Gregory. But for the most part, it's the structure of the St. John liturgy that all of us are using.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really want to go deep into it, there's a writer by the name of Robert Taft, T-A-F-T. He's part of the Byzantine study group in Rome and part of the Roman Church, but he is a Byzantine liturgist. He loves the liturgical tradition of the Orthodox Church, and he's written extensively on it. So that's something that if you really want to go deep into that world, you can do that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for the call, George. Thanks for listening. Appreciate the question.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you, brother.
Take care. Well, I know we're getting towards the end, but I don't want to miss out an opportunity to queue up, take a quick short break here, and then we'll close out the show. But we've got something that Ancient Faith wants to share with you. So let's take this quick break, and we'll come back and we'll close out the show.
Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan will be back in a moment. In the meantime, lines are open at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346.
The Ancient Faith Singles Retreat 30 Plus is a gathering of Orthodox Christians who are at least 30 years of age and are single, divorced, or widowed. The weekend will include daily matins and vespers, and Sunday Divine Liturgy. The group will participate in interactive, leader-led discussion sessions, opportunities for community service, games and social activities, and free time for relaxation and fellowship. The retreat will be held Thursday, February 29 to Sunday, March 3 at Antiochian Village. For more information and to register, visit store.ancientfaith.com/singles. That's store.ancientfaith.com/singles.
Father Evan is ready for your call, and our lines are open at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Evan.
Well, I know our announcer is saying to call me up, but we're right up against the hour, and hopefully you understood why I wanted to play that promo because of that retreat that's coming up. You know, I'm going to be actually at the Antiochian Village for the first time myself in October 16th through the 19th. I'm just looking down here. I'm doing an Orthodox clergy gathering, reclaiming the Great Commission, and I know that registration is ongoing. It's for the Eastern Diocese Ministry Council. And I guess you can go on to the registration link at antiochianvillage.org and you can register there. Like I said, I'll be there the 16th through the 19th. So I'm looking forward to being out there and speaking at that gathering for clergy. Again, if you get a chance, check out my first book, Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, or the second, Reclaiming the Great Commission. And we'll be back on air here soon. So thanks so much for listening tonight and for joining us for Orthodoxy Live. I'm Father Evan, and for Ancient Faith Radio, I'm so glad you're with us. If you miss any part of tonight's broadcast, you can catch it on Ancient Faith Ministries YouTube channel, or if you haven't yet subscribed to this show as a podcast, you can do that, and you can stay up to date with all of our shows. God bless, good night, and we'll talk to you soon.